Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. R Max Tillsley, introduce himself to the listeners and viewers at home. And if you didn't know, the R is for Rob or Robert, whichever you prefer. But he publishes under R Max Tillsley.
G'day there, JR. Yes, R Max Tillsley from the land down under, who writes in far too many genres and subgenres. But yeah, mostly science fiction and fantasy for adults and kids.
Yeah, you and Nathan Petty have the distinction of being in the most of my anthologies.
Well, yeah, so, I think that's mostly just because I stalk you from afar.
Well, we're in the same writing group, which is the next part of the introduction to your listeners, how we first met. So I think we met through the Dead Robot Society.
What's that? I'm stalking you. You're damaging my rep. I'm stalking you.
He stalked me so hard, he joined my writing group. And then we stalked Terry Mixon over there on the Dead Robot Society because, you know, stalking. It's a meta thing. What can I say?
Yeah, no one wants to stalk Paul, though, because we know that we'll get horribly mutilated in one of his stories if we dare.
He's just a little weird anyway. If I was going to stalk him, I would just show up every time he tried to record with a leaf blower. Just, you know, through the neighbor's yard for free just to make all the noise. Or get one of those like really old school chainsaws that are just loud for no other reason than because they could. And then if you could time it really well, you could lean into the PSYOP stuff and like you could get like cars that just randomly like the catalytic converter goes off for no reason just to make loud bangs. Like it could be a thing.
I love it. Though I think now if we're going to go into the modern age, we need to get a Roomba and just have one of those cans of compressed air, siren sort of things, and just have it set so every now and then. And when he goes searching for the sound, the Roomba can just hide under the bed or under the table or something like that.
Oh, I like it. And if you wanted to be really vicious, you could just play really bad music, like just at random times, really loudly.
Yeah, but he's a sick, twisted man, so you don't know what bad music's going to be. You're going to put on your your Katy Perry or something like that, and he's going to be bopping along.
That's possible. All right, well, we'll move right along then to the religion questions because this is the Blasters and Blades podcast. So because you've answered the main questions, we're going to mix it up a little bit. So Stargate, Battlestar Galactica, or Babylon 5?
Oh, man. I have to go Babylon 5. But like this is a painful memory because I watched Babylon 5 back in the days when it would randomly appear on TV at about 11 o'clock at night. And you go, oh, this is really cool. And then you'd never see it again for 3-4 months. And then you find another episode and you go, oh, this is really cool. And it took me ages to actually be able to track down the show enough that I could watch concurrent episodes and go, wow, like this is a full storyline that just keeps on going while each episode was still really cool. So yeah, Babylon 5 for me.
See, the problem with you is being in Australia, like you've got to find electronics designed to work upside down.
Oh, absolutely. We just worked out though that the easiest way to do it was to turn the TV upside down. Everything was great.
See, now you're thinking. This is why they pay you the big bucks.
We believe in high technology here in Australia, so our kangaroos are motorized, everything.
Outstanding. All right, I've seen the memes where it's like kangaroos are just deer that went to prison and they do this side by side. All right, and because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Dragonheart, Reign of Fire, or Aragon?
Now, Dragonheart I loved for the CGI dragon back in the early days when most things that got near fantasy were hideous. Reign of Fire for me is a mixture of, well, I sort of loved the concept and yet it was sort of, did they do as much as they could with it? So I'm going to give Rain of Fire the win, but it's a close one, and not Aragon just because I started trying to read the first book and it was not to my expectations. Let's put it that way.
Okay. All right. And then lastly, one of the crying shames of adulthood, and you haven't answered this one yet, is as you get older, people stop asking you the important questions, like what your favorite dinosaur is. So, Robert, what is your favorite dinosaur?
All right. This one's a good one for me because it takes me right back to when I was a kid and we went over to the UK to the Natural History Museum. And there I saw and got a stuffed brontosaurus. Now, this is a bit of a gnarly one because there came a time when they decided that there was another creature that won out first, and so the brontosaurus was not meant to then be an official scientific name. But after checking out a few more specimens, some scientists have come back and they said, yes, the brontosaurus is its own thing. And so I am holding on to that, holding on to my childhood with dear life and saying the brontosaurus.
That is right up there with the weird scientist trying to tell me Pluto's not a planet, right? Like, no, it's always one in my heart.
It's round, damn it. It's big and it's round. What more do you want?
Right? Just like Brontosaurus, I don't care what the doctors say. They'll always be a dinosaur to me. All right. And because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Ooh, the answer to that is yes. So I grew up on coffee. I worked in IT for quite some time, and I lived off of many a coffee. We tend to do espresso more than your sort of drip filter. But then I moved to the UK for a couple of years, and I was a teacher, and I got hooked on tea. So now I'm both. At home, I tend to do tea because I'm lazy, but I do love a good coffee.
Do you have a favorite kind of tea?
Yep, I go English breakfast, milk, bit of sugar, makes me happy every time. But not cheap tea bags because you put them in and they just pretend they're flavoring the water. So by the time you've taken them out, all you have is slightly muddy water and you go to sip it and it's just, yeah, it's so sad. So sad. I've got a tear forming here.
So do you do the loose leaf or do you do the more mesh bags that are not like it's got loose leaf, but it's still trapped in a tea bag?
Yeah. No, I do tea bags just because, I've swallowed enough of the dregs of the tea bags from where the filters, the tea balls, and all the rest of it don't quite work. So no, I'm lazy. Give me a good tea bag, and then I know I'm not going to be crunching as well as drinking.
Okay, so because you're right for a largely, if you write science fiction and fantasy, I think like 80% of the market is an American audience for the English written word. So do you find that stuff written by and for Australians when it comes to sci-fi and fantasy, well, largely speculative fiction, do you think there's any difference in what you guys read written for yourself versus just the larger market?
Yes, it's a really good one because we're both Western countries. We're both English-speaking countries. We'll laugh at your spelling and you'll laugh at ours, but that's there. But there is both a difference in just some of the terminologies. What I think you would call a shopping cart, I would call a shopping trolley, and so you have those little minor things: sidewalk versus footpath, and that sort of thing. But there are cultural differences. Like we both, I think, have our version of making fun of our politicians. We all sort of are different versions of our involvement in wars and things like that. Our separation from good old Britain, but we're a younger country. We're less, I'd say less culturally religious, if that makes sense. We still have stronger ties to connection and connections to the UK, while also sort of being placed like right in the middle of Asia. So I do think that influences what we do. Aboriginal folk have dreaming story and heritage, and that can sort of play into some of the stories that go along. But sort of a big way to think about it is nothing in terms of buildings here is like older than 150 or so years. Every city here is comparatively new, and so I think it just changes our focus a little bit, because we've got a separate set of baggage that we carry along, but also just being a bit younger, we perhaps, I don't know how you'd put it, but we would sort of reflect more recent things within Australia, that would tie into some of these stories that we write. But then also, I think we quite like to jump back quite far so that we can borrow from our donor countries.
That works.
Of 17th century Japan, let's go and grab some medieval England, that sort of thing.
Speaking of medieval England, you do write fantasy, and you have a hands-on experience with the fantasy genre that most don't have, because I don't think you call it HEMA, but you do, and we can see off to your right, or I guess your left, our right, the helmet that you do medieval combat. So do you feel like that plays into when you write fantasy novels, having held a sword, worn the armor, and all the things?
It's a double-edged weapon. Yes, I use that. So I do fight. I was holding up a sword for anyone who'd seen the video, but probably no one knew. I do have a history of fighting in armor, but also I do a lot of HEMA. So I teach longsword fencing, and there's a lot that you learn about the way that you move. So if you're used to doing a different martial art, quite often you will have stances, ways of balancing, and they are very different to longsword fencing. And also, if you're going to a rapier or a saber, a messer, any of these other single-handed weapons, they each have their own stances, balances, and flow. A rapier is very much a tip towards your opponent. There's a lot of strength and endurance in holding that tip out. A saber will tend to be a flowing, slashing weapon, though there's a lot of room for thrusts as well. All of that takes different aspects to what makes that weapon dangerous, what makes that weapon safe. And because of the nature of the shape of the weapon, then you get, okay, well, would I carry a Zweihander, a massive two-handed weapon, around a town? Well, no, your character's not going to do that, because A, they look like they're about to go and murder someone, and that's going to get some attention. But, what if they go down to sit in a pub? Right, where are they going to put that sword? And so one of the best things about dealing with weaponry is you begin to learn the context in which they'd operate. What your opponent's armor would be, whether it might be considered, as I was sort of saying, is it considered appropriate to go around? Like if you're wandering around with a massive shield in a town, like, why would you be doing that unless you're actually expecting a fight? So that goes in. But what you got to be super careful with when you get into any sort of topic that you love is not to overdo the detail. Because if I wrote a 50-page scene where I'm saying, okay, the longswords moved up to Ox with the tip at the opponent, the quillins held high, the arms nearly back against the head, I probably lost the reader already. If I talk about that, then cutting into an Unterhau, a lower blow coming upwards against the opponent's blade, all these sorts of things, you can get lost in your own terminology, and you can sort of get lost in the mechanical details of what's going on. And like in a movie, you can be showing all of this in a second or two, right? Without naming. In a book, you're just bogging your reader down. So you have to be super careful to flavor, to take into account in your mind, but not to sort of bog it down and just kill the action that you're wanting to include.
So it's sometimes the same danger that any subject matter expert has, where you know too much and it's paring it down so you don't bore people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like if you're into military things, then maybe there's a particular rifle and it's gone through 15 different sub revisions as they've worked out that, this jammed, or wow, that magazine actually turned out to have problems, or they went through this site and then that site, and all these sort of things. Like you can flavor that if your audience is wanting that detail, sure, but that any time that you deep dive on that, you're risking losing another set of readers. So I try and be super careful. I've got a book, a fantasy novel for adults that's in a book one that's not yet published, that involves a lot of sword work, and so I had to be super careful not to overdo it. And sit there and go, yes, I love writing about this, because I wanted the readers to care about what the sword fights meant, and not to sit there and skip ahead because it's just a whole bunch of back and forth hacks.
Okay. So what is it that brought you into, like, obviously you don't become a writer without having first been a reader. At least I don't think I've talked to a single author that's the case. So what got you into reading, and then more specifically speculative fiction books?
Okay, so I think there are a lot of things coming in together. Like, I have an older brother, and so his interests, I'm sure, influenced me. Certainly introduced me to things like Dungeons and Dragons at age 5 with the red box. Got me into fantasy. Absolutely, there was a single player campaign with that introduced me to the concepts. And then as I grew up, there was a book called Master of the Grove by, I think it's Victor Kelleher, which is a little rough around the edges, but it was a fantasy novel, and my year 7 teacher taught it to the class. And that introduced me to fantasy novels. And from there, libraries, school libraries, I just, anything I could find. I absolutely loved reading. The excitement, just being taken to another world, and that sort of stretched into sci-fi as well. I've always loved technology. I love just that sudden possibility, that difference from the norm. And I think really, like, we call it speculative fiction because it is that speculating, and whether it's speculating that you're off in a world in which there are dragons and fireballs, or you're in a sci-fi world where your thoughts can be copied off to a clone or something like that. It's all that chance to just go what if, to take away from just what we know now. And I love a little bit of that escapism, I gotta say. I think a little bit of that escapism just lifts the spirits, and I think we need more of that.
Yeah. Now, do you engage with like sci-fi or fantasy in the games or the movies too, or do you prefer just to read?
Oh no. So I am still going through. It's going to escape my mind. The recent role-playing game, Baldur's Gate 3. I've played that recently. It goes back some of the early crazy ones I played. There was a game called Entomorph, which was you're essentially in a world where all these buggy mutants have appeared, and sort of the populace is half mutated, and you have to track down what's going on. There was an ancient DOS game I played called Demon's Winter, which was essentially a role playing game with beautiful 4 colors on the screen at one time. Oh, I tell you, it was magic. just the quality of the animation. But it is that funny thing. I love great graphics, but it still comes back to that being able to explore, to being able to play. Recently with books, I've been going through the Dungeon Crawler Carl series using the audio books, and it's like I do love a good book, but I'm so impressed in how the narration has just taken it up to a next level, and that one's a lit RPG series.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people recommend that. It is on my list to get to eventually.
Yeah,
so
and
is lit RPG
say,
something you're interested in?
By thought, by expectation, no, because I imagined all the grinding that annoys me as a player, that sort of took me out of things like World of Warcraft. Not to diss other people, just I didn't like that. And then I was like, well, therefore, lit RPG novels. I was going to read about them killing something 500 times to get enough experience to do this or that. But the Dungeon Crawler Carl series very cleverly plays on, yes, introducing rules and concepts of this constructed system, but there's also external politics of this giant alien civilization, or many aliens in that civilization that have caused the events to happen. And so you've got this weird juxtaposition of fantasy in with sci-fi. You've got the structure of a game, but they managed to the author manages to keep it very personal, and I think that surprised me. So I might give more authors to try in the genre. But yeah, it's been a surprise for me.
Yeah, I recently discovered some of those too, and I'm finding that for the same reason. I don't need it to be as crunchy on the numbers, but I like the progression fantasy angle. I like seeing the character kind of develop. I mean, obviously, characters grow in every book, right? Like, but seeing it done more deliberately.
Yeah, like
I think.
Like it's funny because when a game that I play gets too number crunchy, I tend to just ignore that level of detail and sort of just smash my way through in terms of plot and the rest of it, because I find I don't have the patience to really sit there and go, well, this has +3 in that, but then under these circumstances it's a bit different. Maybe if I'm against an ice creature, it's this or that. That tends to kill me and take me out of a game a bit. So I sort of gloss over those details and just go, this is good enough. And so I think there's a risk for lit RPG to do the same thing, and maybe those people who just love those details, this is really their thing. But there seems to be a real talent in giving just enough to give you a system which is interesting. Like really, it's almost like a hard magic system, a bit like our Brandon Sanderson fantasy. It's a hard technology. It's a hard magic system taken to as far as you can go. But if you manage to keep the story going, remember that characters matter. I think that that allows this strange sort of amalgam of different things to work together.
So I think the distinction between lit RPG and game lit is that level of crunchiness versus, the game is there, it's important, the character building is important, but it's not so math heavy. So I prefer a little bit more on the light side. Like I like seeing them advance. I like seeing them pick their skills or whatever. If it gets too like I have to do calculus in my head to figure out what's going to happen next, I don't have time for that.
And that where it goes, like it sort of flows in when you look at pick a path game books and that sort of thing. And I'm sure we'll cover this later, but just you have things with zero crunch in there where it is purely story options, and you have then ones where you have hit points to watch for, and maybe you'll have some stats that can go up or down, or you can collect items, but they're still story driven. And that I wonder, I'm quite curious as to whether sort of those that birthed the lit RPG genre, whether there was perhaps a history in reading those sorts of things. And I said, well, yeah, but what if we took away all of the choices, from the reader, and we just almost like write out a path of those stories and just beef up the story element of it, and that's perhaps how you got lit RPG.
So since you did that, it's a good segue, because we want to talk about two things. We want to talk largely about the pick a path, choose your own adventure, whatever you want to call it. Although the reason nobody uses choose your own adventure is because it is trademarked. So if you don't have the license, you can't use it.
Don't sue us. Yes.
Right. And so it's pick a path, choose a direction, whatever they come up with, so they don't get sued by whoever owns the CYOA, whatever. Choose your own adventure. But so did you read those books as a kid?
Oh, yes. So I think the first ones I came across were the classic Choose Your Own Adventures. Then there were some ones, I can't remember the name of the series, but it was something times something. There was a thing with like a woolly mammoth that I quite remember. There were Lone Wolf, Fighting Fantasy, a whole host of ones. I was a bit late there were Goosebump ones. So for kids that like little scarier things, you choose. So some of the major publishing companies are still putting them out, as well as, these days, obviously it's there's an exploding set of us indies that do the same as well. But yeah, I think there's always been that desire for, I want to be a bit more involved in the story. And that's, if you think about it, computer games are essentially, I want to get in there. And people complain when, this game, it just railroaded me. There was only one plot. And that's where either pick a path or game books. I just tend to use game book just because it's faster, even if it's not always super clear. But you pick a game book, and all of a sudden, you've got a whole series of options, and depending on the way the story's written, you either sort of have to work through different sections and come back to a successful ending, or you can go through and explode the story and end up with hugely different endings, depending on the choices you make. And I think each of them are valid.
When I was a kid, it was the Lone Wolf Choose Your Own Adventure stories, where you were like a warrior monk, and you got a sword, and you picked either a sword, a two-handed sword, a sword and a shield, a staff. Like, you could kind of pick your weapon, and it told you what your points were. And you had to maintain a separate character sheet. And then as you go through, what you do affects your character, which affects your options. And of course, little boys, we all cheated.
I was just about to say, to decide whether or not you fudged the numbers.
Right.
Either like there was somewhere you could flip coins, somewhere you could roll some dice, or some would come with a sort of a table at the back with a whole series of randomly positioned numbers, and then you're meant to like close your eyes and stab with a pencil, and wherever you tapped, or your finger or whatever, and that was the number that was the roll for you. So yeah, heaps of different systems out there.
So yeah, I love those as a kid. I actually collected, maybe not intentionally because I just didn't throw them away, but as I, when you get your first house, your parents generally like, hey, the crap you got in my attic, come get it now. And so as I was going through that, I'm like, oh, shoot, I still have all of these books. And so I gave them to my kids, who then read them too. Both of my boys at one point in time read those books. And there were two different series that were the Lone Wolf, and we have one of them, and the other one isn't complete. But I try to look for them. And some of those books, they're like, maybe 50 pages or whatever, because they're kids' books. And they're like $100 or more. Because you just can't get them. It's one of those nostalgia things for people.
Oh, absolutely. I got introduced to this sort of Australian New Zealand game book collectors Facebook group, and so I just I sort of in there just saying hello every now and then, and watching some of these things and the incredible work people are doing to try and collect these full sets. And I'd never realized there were different imprints of them, and so you'd have like different colored spines. And so certain versions, the original ones might have like green or orange or whatever spines, and so they're different from the other ones. And so people are trying to collect all of these the full sets so that they can then have it. And then you get these sad moments when someone's going, oh, financial situations changed. I've got to sell off a bunch of books, and yeah, obviously some of these prices can be high, but I find it really interesting that like there's a human story around the buying and selling of these too. Um, in Australia, we don't tend to have like attics or basements, so I suspect a lot of us ended up just losing those books as we moved out of home and went through life. So it's probably even trickier for us to try and get those sets back.
Yeah, and you've got larger problem with like snakes and certain spiders that might be attracted to the glue that's in holding the books together. Where it could be it could start attracting things you don't want. I could imagine.
No,
I know
bushfire hazard. Bushfire hazard. I'm sure those old books would go up in seconds.
that too. I know. I mean, but I did love reading those as a kid. I would love to write one, but I've seen your flow chart when you're writing your own books that we'll talk about later, and like it's that meme with the serial killer and all the strings connected to all the different things. Like that is Robert writing one of these books.
I think you have to do that, and you also need to. My hair's a bit short for it, but pull it all out in an Einstein sort of impression. Get a bit of chalk in your hair if you're on the younger side. Sort of genius and insanity. And I'm not calling myself a genius, but you got to pretend you're a genius, embrace the insanity, and yeah, that's exactly what it looks like.
I've seen if somebody ever came up with a formula where like you got to chart this, chart that, and it like automatically formulates it, and you just insert story, I could probably manage it, but like I've seen what you have to do to beta read it. Like you have to go through each flow path and make sure each one still like it's not just is the grammar right, does it still flow one into the other, and it could get wonky.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's one of those things that I hadn't realized until I started working on my first one, Brains, was that the structure sort of has to work based on the story rather than the story based on the structure. And I'm sure some people could make it work that way. But what I sort of realized was because it's everything is obviously built around choices, making decisions and things, and then that shifting the story, like you have to work out where's you've got to have these frequent decisions. Where is a good point for this to happen? If you sort of go, oh, okay, I need to have this sub branch have 4 sections. Well, but what if it turns out to be a really interesting spot to explore? You got to throw away that structure. So it's I actually think it's much more about going, oh, cool thing. Oh, here's a terrible choice I can absolutely crush the soul of my reader with. And okay, well, I'm going to take this path to start off with, and I'll leave that one for me to come back later and make an evil laugh as I sit there and write that one out. Go, and that's also important. You need to have evil laughs quite regularly.
I've actually seen a couple of years ago when you first started writing Brains, which was the first game book or Pick a Path or whatever I think you call yours Pick a Path Adventures. When you first started writing that one, like we talked about it in our writing group about how fun it could be to write one of these. And I did some research. Nathan Petty and we started diving into the Publisher's Rocket or KDP Rocket, whatever it as, the same program that's evolved over time. And we started looking, like there are actually romance writers who have written Choose Your Own Adventure. So it's like you've got the love triangle. Well, now you get to pick.
I think that's one of the most clever things to do. And like romance writers, they're always at the forefront. So it's almost weird that it took a while for that to be a thing. Maybe just we weren't in the right reading circles.
Yeah, well, when we looked for it, there were also some in the more mature content reading stories where romance is a little more physical. Some of those did really well too. And so like I think the concept of choose your own adventure has so much appeal that it almost transcends just children's books. But most of them aren't written for adults, so they don't have as many choices. Because when they do have choices, if they read even remotely close to whatever the genre the author did, like they're buying off like hotcakes.
Yeah, so it's actually it's one of the challenges when you write anything. You're either writing purely for yourself, and you're sort of hoping that there are other readers out there that have similar tastes, or quite often you are still sort of recognizing that you're writing to an audience of a particular sort, and that will tend to then shape what you can and what you can't. So obviously, if you're writing a steamy romance, you're immediately removing your young readers from that. So, and I find when I'm writing, because I'm sort of aiming for that, you know, like maybe a really good reader at 8 years old, but normally sort of 9 to 12, 13. There's levels of gore, levels of tough choices that I put in there, but I balance it with how I write, so that way I can still write things that an adult will enjoy, but it's just couched in such a way that it makes it really accessible to a reader. And I do things like I don't gender the main character. I for my pick a path game books, I don't have romance or anything along those lines, just because I want to have them insert themselves. So I have to be super careful to write it in such a way that allows you to be whoever you are, but now you're in this situation. Maybe if it's brains, you're on a school excursion. So if you're an adult, hopefully that takes you back to when you're a kid. But yeah, I want to sort of allow the greatest number of people to be able to get out there and enjoy that. But there are some horror ones out there that are very definitely just for adults, and I think that's brilliant too, because whatever people are into, let's have books for it.
So would you consider the Tangled Fates that you've written, the series we're going to talk about after the commercial, would you consider that middle grade based on your target audience, or YA? I'm not totally clear on the distinction there, to be honest.
Yeah, I call it upper middle grade, or here in Australia, junior fiction. And that sort of covers, like they say 9 to 12, I say sort of 9 to 13. But what you have with kids' books, and so I used to be a teacher, so it's sort of something I've had to deal with. You get your picture books, you get your chapter books, which are super early, lots of pictures, and then you get often comedy books that are lots of cartoony sort of things, very low story content, but tend to grab a lot of kids because they're so silly. And then you start to get into really novels for kids. And that's sort of where I play novels for kids. So kids who are either their own reading level is enough that they can read a page of text without dying, or they can have it read to them and they'll still maintain interest. And so that's sort of my general novels for kids are like that, because you have this, you hit YA, you get drugs, sex, and other sorts of topics that are pretty intense. And so a lot of readers, young readers, go from, okay, they need something more than these very kiddie books with lots and lots of pictures, but they're not ready for really mature content. And that's sort of where upper middle grade tends to fit in. Game books, pick a path books, it's a little different, because you can have a lot, some art in there that sort of appeals and grabs them, helps stimulate the imagination, but also because each section's limited and because there are lots of decisions to be made, that actually gets readers that might be reluctant readers, like they don't love to sit down and read a whole book. Maybe their attention struggles with something that's really long, and all of a sudden, you can sort of appeal to a broader kids audience on that basis of oh, here's a sugar hit. I've read a bit. Now I get to make a choice. I'm going to jump in. Oh, and there's another choice. And these choices have to be consequential. So the stories tend to be quite intense. And all of that, I think, brings in an appeal for reluctant readers, for younger readers. But if you write these well, you have proper story paths as well. So actual storylines. And that takes them on a roller coaster. And so when they hit the ending and get a satisfying story, that also appeals to the kids that are a little bit further along, and they're really ready for a storyline that has bad things happening to the characters, that have those moments of triumph. But yeah, I could go on about that forever, but that's how it goes in this this section of readers.
Okay, well, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man, and then we'll come talk about your books in the genre. So, boom!
From R Max Tillsley, author of Brains, the post-apocalyptic pick-a-path adventure with more than 60 endings, comes the Susie Steele Adventures. Susie has a heart of gold, a set of bad dreams, and a hidden destiny. 6 months ago, Susie's father went to work and never returned, leaving Susie to her hobby of chasing away nannies. That is, until the mysterious and glamorous Cassandra roars into her life, driving a red sports car and promising to be the best of friends. When Susie stumbles on her father's secret lair, a world of magic, ghosts and mysteries beckons. Can she discover the truth, avoid being expelled from school, and keep a ruthless secret society off her back? She's to have a ghost of a chance. She'll need the help of her best friends, one grumpy cat, and a whole lot of daring. The Susie Steele Adventures from R Max Tillsley. Book 1, The Steel Trap. Book 2, The Steel Bite. Perfect for readers 9+. Available in print and ebook.
All right, thank you for sticking through that commercial interlude. You might recognize the voice, so thanks for the sponsorship. All right, so we've talked about your Tangled Fates series. So I'm going to throw some of the cover art. So this is the first book in the series. And then we've got the second book, which I really, really like this cover.
Thanks. That took me a huge amount of time. I was basically living inside Photoshop. There are so many layers to this cover. It's not funny. It's one of those things where, like a cover, you're trying to get across the ideas of what's in the story, but unless you have an artist to custom do it, you've got to be really careful to put together all these different image elements to create things, and then just have it not only be its own piece of art, but then fit in with the other books in the series.
So let's talk about that series real quick. So generally speaking, series for most people are book 1 follows book 2 follows book 3. But if you've got to pick your path, there is really no way for characters to, well, I mean, characters could cross over, but like there's so much variance. Is each of these books connected, or are they only connected in that they are Tangled Fates books?
Yeah, definitely. The only connection is that the Tangled Fates, and what that sort of means is that there's a style to the stories, rather than a character that goes across. Because like Brains is a zombie apocalypse, and if I tried to just pull that in to a fantasy setting and say that there were, that there's all these deep connections through to that. It doesn't give it a chance to breathe its own set of scary moments. I've got zombie zebras. I've got people jumping off of buildings onto helicopters. It just that needs to be its own thing, and so the Winter King, when you're pulled through a magical portal into another world, that other world has to have a chance to breathe its own life, its own monsters, its own sort of problems.
But do you have zombie kangaroos?
No. Though I do have undead in it, because I can't get away from undead. And in fact, on the cover, there's a wonderful little skeleton with a bow ready to shoot at you. And that sort of gives a hint as to what one of the main sets of undead are within this.
Okay. So the first one is a zombie apocalypse, and your choices determine whether you survive the apocalypse or you get eaten. What is the Winter King about?
So it's a bit of a mystery in its own way, in that with the Winter King, when you're pulled into this portal or jump through this portal, you don't know. You don't know what's happening, and there's three main branches of the story that you can do, and each of them sort of reveals a little bit more about what's going along, in particular from the points of view of elves, dwarves, and humans. One of those paths leave you in a position where you can defeat the main evil, funnily enough, the Winter King, that has set all these events in motion. But the choices that these other races made at the time also give you a chance to find out about different elements of the story, and perhaps why things ended up the way that they did. And I liked setting that up, because I think it gave like real value in going into these different storylines.
So with this one, they're all still set for the same target audience, right? So like they're still age appropriate when it comes to the violence levels in this action mystery.
Yeah. This it's funny to say. I say this one is just that little bit grittier than Brains, because I just wanted a little bit more of an epic fantasy feel in it. I wanted it to have that sort of slightly more dramatic element to it. Whereas Brains, I wanted you to feel like you were in a classic zombie apocalypse, so that everything revolved around this city that you're set within, and so it just creates a slightly different tone. But you might be getting eaten by zombie clowns, or maybe by a giant zombie skeleton, or a meat monster in the Winter King that's essentially made out of arms and legs and eyes and mouths from many other creatures in this giant walking ball of horror. It's all in how you put it across. And so it still fits within that 9 to 12, 9 to 13-year-old range. But again, I still write it so that there are elements that older readers would like. But if you're a 7-year-old kid, you better be pretty tough.
So I don't know how much market research you could do on something like this. Do you think your readers tend to read it all the way through, in that they go back and they take all the different paths they can to see all the different options, or are they a one and done?
It's both. So I like to do local events, markets, conventions, and things like that. And so I get readers coming back from me, for kids, telling me their favorite endings, and how many that they've found. So like in Brains, I think there were 64 endings, and I think 67 in The Winter King, if I remember correctly. And so you get the ones that do that, and that's again the advantage of them being able to come back. There's something exciting. I don't know if there are a lot of readers that would find all of the endings, but I definitely get the impression that they do come back. They do search for different ones. I have had kids come to me and tell me their favorite, and I've said, "Oh, have you died by pizza yet?" And they said, "Oh, no." Well, better go find that. And they're like, "Oh, yeah."
Nice. I remember because I edited, well, not edited it, but I beta read that when you sent that to me. I was laughing hysterically. So,
Well, you know,
obviously, in the 8 to 13 range, they don't have credit cards. So you're not getting any impulse buying. I mean, they might have an allowance. I don't know if that's as big of a deal over there in Australia for your local events as like I grew up where we, did your chores, you got a little bit of allowance. Spending money, pocket money, whatever you want to call it. So how do you convince the parents that, like, because I mean, you're essentially you're selling to two audiences. You got to sell to the parent and the kid.
Yeah, it's super tricky for online sales. That's the reality is for any sort of kids book that's an online thing. The purchasers are parents or librarians most of the time. Sometimes gifts and that. So it's hard. I use targeted advertising, but it's not easy. But in person at events, uh, when I'm talking to a parent that's there, because sometimes like kids love the cover art. When I tell them what it's about, they tend to be pretty excited. When I'm talking to parents, what I like to talk to them about is that not only do these books give them actual storylines, but they really get the kids involved. By having them make choices, they see the ramifications of their choices. And I don't moralize in what I write, but I love to apply tension. I like decisions to feel like they have impact, and what that really does for kids. Like kids these days, they're used to watching 30-second videos if they're that long. They're used to swapping from one app to the other. They're used to a YouTube short. So a story, a pick a path, a game book lets that kid get that same level of transition, that level of constantly getting these little sugar hits. But it's a bit sneaky because they're still getting real story. They're still getting the structure that makes stories appealing to Western audiences, for the past however many hundreds of years. They're getting that. They're getting the depth of language, but it's all in this super exciting package. And then parents are going, yeah, actually, I recognize that if my kid is going to do well, that they gain so much from reading. And you tell them, well, this is what lets the kids who are sometimes a little overstimulated get into a book, and I think they appreciate that. And I know I've just sent one across to another country, to New Zealand, and the kids saw the cover and like, ooh, it was a teacher that bought it, and then that teacher's going, oh, I should be doing this as a class book, because as a class we can make these choices. Like whatever gets the kids involved in reading, that's what you go for.
So does the fact that you used to be a teacher help you when you're selling to parents? Does that give them any level?
It's I use it to explain how I wrote the book to be interesting. I try not to do a bit of sort of, well, look, here as the primary school teacher, I shall lecture you on your kids' reading. But I talk about how when we're writing something that's aimed for kids, you don't talk down to the readers. You don't have to give up using quality language. You just need to support it, the meaning of unfamiliar words, with all the context that's around it within the story. You don't have to turn it into some just sugary story where there's no stress for the characters, right? Like, kids love it when the characters' lives are on the line, and you'd be surprised how many kids love an absolutely wonderfully terrible death for the character, because they're invested enough in what's going on. But if you write it correctly, it's just exciting. And you're sitting there going, oh, like looking at a train wreck. You're like, wow, that's terrible. That's sort of cool. So yeah, I often sort of talk in those terms when I'm talking to parents about how the Tangled Fates books can sort of get their kids into reading.
So, are you writing more of the Tangled Fates? Is there going to be a third volume for this collection?
Oh yeah. There's definitely more. The one which I've probably have most written, but will probably never release, is one that's based on the Wizard of Oz, a real twisted Wizard of Oz, but just like the Wizard of Oz itself is actually a bit twisted. The copyright history and things is complicated, and that sort of leaves me a little wary about what I'd like to do. But I've got a list of ideas. Everything vampires and werewolves, more fantasy, a science fiction one. So there's a lot of them. It's just my to write pile. We often talk about our to read pile as readers, but my to write pile is huge. So it's just a matter of finding the slots in the schedule to get the next one done. But there will be more.
I could see something like Heinlein's Juveniles, this sci-fi that he did, would work to take those concepts, like Space Cadet, have gun, will travel kind of thing, where it was a youth space force, where basically like the Boy Scouts in space almost, except for then they were doing the kind of dangerous things that boys want to read about.
Yes.
I could see something like that working, and there's so many potential in that kind of setting for death to be hilarious, like you get vacuumed into space, or the critical core failure.
Look, absolutely. There's like, I've been playing a computer game of late, No Man's Sky, which I played on and off for a while because it was released and in a sort of a partially complete state, and then they've just added features, and it takes me all the way back to a computer game I used to play back in the day called Elite, where you'd be flying around this spaceship and you'd go to different systems, and there'd be trading and there'd be pirates, and it's like that design. I always wanted to set myself up a cockpit style around my computer so I could just flick switches that did nothing, just because I wanted to imagine myself in a spaceship. I don't think my wife would appreciate me adding that to the house, but yeah, I do think that adventure, like kids love adventure. And I think that creating those opportunities, whether it's sort of space trading, whether it's you're dragged into some sort of conflict with aliens, whatever, it doesn't really matter, as long as you've got some sort of real excitement that just takes an idea and takes it beyond what the kids are expecting. You're going to give them a good story if that's what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think there's just so much potential for shenanigans to be humorous as well. Because I think at that age, they definitely want a little bit of humor. So like, you go shake hands with an alien, and you forgot to put your glove on, and that alien skin is toxic to you, and then you're whatever. I think that could work, and given how gratuitous some of these games for kids are as far as the violence, I think they're a little bit desensitized to it, so you can have a little bit more fun than they might have let themselves, 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah, in Brains, I have one of the deaths is having a well, I call a semi-trailer. I don't know what you in the US in the US
Wheeler.
Yeah, something like that. Roll over the character's head and crush it like a melon. Um, yeah,
Belly Mark.
if you saw that on screen, that could look pretty gross, But if you describe it, I think it can be imagined in a nice, fun way that doesn't give them too many nightmares.
1 or 2 is okay. 3, yeah, you're pushing it. So when we grew up, we had a game we all played in school. I've never met an American who graduated through the American school system that can't have who doesn't have a story about when they played Oregon Trail in school. It's the iconic, Western expansion, the wagon trains. And when we played it, it was a computer game, and I'm getting somewhere with this, so trust me. And you've all the ways throughout it's become a card game for adults in nostalgia. Is there any, the joke was that Terry Mixon has shared, you died from dysentery, because that's the common way to die on the wagon train, but you spell it dysentery. Is there any game like that, or any kind of experience that is kind of quintessentially Australian that would make a good concept? There's room obviously in an Oregon Trail story, but what about from the Australian experience?
Okay, so probably for Australia, it would be our bush rangers.
Okay.
There's probably bush ranger was essentially like a highwayman if you're English, essentially someone who was robbing at gunpoint. But our most famous bush ranger was Ned Kelly, and he and his gang they made armor, like super heavy, thick armor, including these really rough, chunky helmets, and they ran around causing chaos. Some viewed them as like sort of almost like folk heroes, but yeah, they would have their pistols, so they'd be firing at the local cops while wearing this armor that would be bouncing off the bullets of the era. And like there's even like a famous artist who one of his sort of series of artwork is all these very stylized version of these bushrangers. So I could see a story set in Australia where not only are you maybe dodging these bush rangers, maybe there's a big cache of money to get, but yeah, you could have snakes, maybe a drop bear or two, all sorts of crazy.
Okay, that
and
could
of
be
course getting beaten up by a kangaroo. Sorry, I can't believe I left that out there.
absolutely, and put some shrimp on the bobby. I've every time I talk to an Australian, we make jokes about the Outback Steakhouse and Foster's beer, and they will tell you Outback isn't authentic and nobody drinks Foster's.
but you've just made me think. If I did a story like that, I'd have to have like a zombie Steve Irwin appear. Wonder how much I'd get sued for that.
Steve Irwin, just change the letter a little bit. Stephen Irwin. but yeah.
G'day, mate. Watch as I stick my finger in. No, wait, no, yes.
So I think the reason I'm curious is because I really do think Americans are kind of, as an audience, readers in general, like they don't just want the same old setting. So I think if you bring some of that, some of your own Australian heritage to the story, I think that might actually be a selling feature for a lot of people, just because it'd be kind of cool, right? To have the
that would almost be like the opposite of the Winter King, where I had to sort of sit there and think, okay, so do I remember when I've been cold? Oh yes, when I visited other countries. Yeah.
You guys got places to get snow though, right?
No, that's true. I have actually been skiing in Australia. We have like 1 or 2 mountains where there's snow, and when there's not snow, we get out snow machines because we're stubborn.
Yeah, I can see that. So with this series, obviously, like you read it yourself. Editor's just going to do a straight line pass through it, each page to kind of edit. How do you get your quality control process, your editing for story process when you've got so many paths?
Yeah, it's really hard, and it goes to back in the day when planes first started being flown and they'd crash quite frequently. They needed a way to make sure that everything was set before taking off, and so that they had checklists. And that's essentially the way that I do this is along with my beta readers. I produce checklists and that have not only sort of the different sections, but also how they all connect to each other. And so I have people who read through, and boy, I can tell you, I do a lot of read throughs myself, and go through and look at each point. Does it make logical sense? Am I talking about something that's actually in a different storyline? Am I linking back into a storyline in such a way that it still makes sense when these two different paths have joined in? Because part of the tangled thing in Tangled Fates is I like to have some looping back here and there for certain story paths, and that's tricky. It's hard. So it just requires a lot of repetition, a lot of double checking to do that. And is it possible that an error might slip through somewhere? I don't know. I've not heard one yet, but it's always possible. But it just requires patience. That's why I always think, oh, okay, yes, all right, I've finished writing this. I'll have this out in no time. And 3 months later, it's still slogging to get it ready to go.
That would be very, very frustrating. But so if you had to pick, because you've obviously written two very different Pick-a Path books, which is your favorite death scene so far between the two of them?
Ooh, it's super tricky. There's a scene in The Winter King where after you're killed, one of your limbs is ripped off to join, to be sort of put into this monster. And I just love that for the beautiful grossness of it. In Brains, oh man, there's so many that I have. I think it was zombie otters that get you in a zoo, but I think it has to be death by pizza. I think it just has to be death by pizza in Brains that just tickles me.
That would be my favorite. So go ahead.
No, that's all right. I was just going to sit there and talk about pineapple on pizzas, but let's not go there.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to get the heretics all upset. So if you were going to pick, I mean, you've got lots of ideas. We've talked about lots of ideas. Where do you think the most fun that you're leaning to now, if you're going to start writing a Pick a Path book next, what do you think you're inspired by right now?
So one of the things that I think about when I'm doing these is no matter what the idea is, it can't just be one idea because it has to split it into so many. So I am super struggling between two that are science fiction that I love. One of them is the idea of being brought into a computer world. And ever since I first saw the movie Tron.
I was about to ask about Tron when you said that.
Oh, it's I cannot tell you how much that has influenced me. I loved it so much. And so I have this partially complete structure that is set sort of mostly within, but also one of the paths is without that world, sort of on the outside looking in, that I'd love to do. But with these, I feel you have to just crack the code right so that not only is each individual story path sort of really exciting, but it all really connects together well. So that one's on the it's an in progress that's there. I go back and I touch it, but I just have other things I have to do first. And then, like right now, just because I am playing a space game, is that my brain's in there going, "Oh, I could be doing something with this. Like maybe you could." Have been kidnapped by aliens, and then you've crash landed on a planet, and then you could have getting your own ship and traveling. Maybe you could help out in some sort of rebellion or something. That's in their playing, but I am working on a different novel, so I sort of have to take those ideas and go, yes, that's great, not now.
Okay. Is there anything about, because we kind of ramble just because that's how you and I get when we get talking, and we don't have adult supervision with us today. Is there anything about the Tangled Fates books that you think the audience should know, either if we've got kids listening or if parents are listening and they think, hey, should I pitch the parents that might be listening, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. So the thing about the Tangled Fates, as I said, it's certainly no sex or drugs. So that might help understanding the appropriateness of the audience. It is non-gendered because I just want anyone to be able to read it. I don't want it to be okay, so it's about a boy, so a girl couldn't read it. It's about a girl, so a boy's going and not want to read it. It's meant to be so that you can self-insert. Like we often complain about authors self-inserting, but I want the reader to self-insert. And so everything that's in there that is scary is designed. I don't know if you've ever used this term in the US, what we call titillating, which means it's sort of exciting, but not not crazy over the top. So it's about making things scary, but not terrorizing the child. The story paths, like some of the choices are tough. Like in Brains, there's a whole section of story where you have to choose whether or not you're going to try and save someone from a zombie hippo. If you choose to do so, there's a story out. If you don't, it leaves a whole different section. That's a tough choice. If you don't allow kids to explore making tough choices, then they don't get to consider their own thinking. And so I love to give these tough moments, not because I'm trying to slap the kid around the head and say, well, don't do this, don't do that, but it's what are the ramifications? And I think that's what makes these fun. So whether or not you go, well, the moral choice, the terrible choice would be this or that. It's what happens if? And I think that's really good for kids to be able to just stretch their thinking a little bit while they're doing that, without sort of having a particular, I don't want the kids to feel that they've discovered the R Max Tillsley code of ethics. I want them to feel that they've gone through a roller coaster, and what they make of it is what they will. But the roller coaster was exciting, but also sort of stretched them.
So really what it comes down to is you're teaching Socratic reasoning. So if this, then that, if that, then what? So you're teaching them to think the next step and then potentially one or two or however many steps after. So they start logical reasoning. You're also teaching decisiveness and decision-making, because that's something that's a hard skill even for adults. And I do think there's something to be said for that genre of books, giving that to people at a young age.
Yeah, and sometimes you go, well, this is the sensible choice. Oh no, that ended up with you drowning in a trap in a maze. Winter King. Right. So sometimes what seems a reasonable choice, without wanting to rob the reader of agency, the kid of agency, it's good sometimes to read something. Go, oh no, that seems so reasonable, and it just didn't work. That's fine. Go back, jump to a different section, whatever. Like it's fine. It's fine for story elements to end in failure. Like that, and so the kid goes back and takes something different because if we protect our kids from failure too much, that they never build that resilience to go back in and talk about a safe way to explore success, failure, difficult choices. It's a book; they can put it down.
So one of the cool things about the genre, though, is because it forces kids to think outside of the box too. I remember a Choose Your Own Adventure book I read as a kid, and the name escapes me. But at some point in time, you get a power where you have to decide if you want to be able to slow down time or speed it up. And there's benefits to both. So you slow down time, you have more time to think about things. And you can kind of, if everyone else is, but that means everyone else is going a lot faster than you. With speeding up time, that gives you an advantage, but it's also, that was the drawback, is it aged you prematurely because time was going quicker for you. And so, thinking in terms of cause and effects and consequences I think it's important for young kids to learn. And it's not always as apparent in other venues that kids will engage in play learning as in a book like Choose Your Own Adventure, Tangled Fates, Pick a Path. I think it's a unique to the kind of story that gives them those so many opportunities after opportunities in a fun way.
Yeah, I agree. And the fun, I think, is the emphasis because, I don't write these to be like a parable, to be a fable, right? They're written for the kids to enjoy because, there's so much stuff where, and you need them with like picture books and that. They're sort of teaching some basic concepts to children around socialization and the rest of it. But it's good for a story sometimes to just be a story. But the thing about a good story, and hopefully especially when you go into a great story, and I won't claim that, but it's something to aim for, is that there are all those sort of ups and downs, moral tests, failures, and all of that as part of a story, because that's what makes it interesting. We like fiction because even when it pulls us out and is giving us escapism, we're still playing with all of these quandaries, these challenges, because we like them. Like you have a story where there's no downsides. It's boring. It's boring. So yeah, you can introduce all these things, while still going, but there's a story, or these many parts. They're about fun, but they're about fun in a way that's really testing you.
Absolutely. So as we bring this to a close, is there anything about the Tangled Fate books that we didn't cover that you think we should before we wrap it up?
All I'd say is that I'd emphasize that the way that I write mine, I write them to have storylines. I write them so that there's meaning behind the decisions that the characters make. I love having them come across friends, build up these relationships, and then really tug on them as to how they treat those friends, how whether or not they can save those friends, whether those friends will work with them. And I think that elevates it above some of the stories that you and I might have read when we were young, where they were pretty random. Maybe there was like this is winning TM, but a lot of the choices were just pretty random, didn't have a big, story influence. They were just like, oh yeah, I've got to give you an option. All right, do you take the left door? Do you take the right door? I'd like to think those who read Brains and the Winter King go, oh, actually, yeah, wow, these were there's so many stories packed into these books.
Yeah. So what are you writing at the moment?
Alrighty, so I am writing one of my Susie Steele novels. So I'm writing book 3. I have no claim as to when I'll get it finished because I often work on a project, put it aside a little bit and come back. But I have this idea, and I can't share what it is, but just a bad guy, and how what that bad guy uses to achieve their ends, and it's just going around and around in my head. So I'm just writing to get to that point, so I can sit there and make the crazy happen. So that's what's on the cards at the moment. I have a couple of adult fantasy book 1s that will not see the light of day until I've written book 2. So as soon as I've got this Susie Steele squared away, I want to get a book 2 of one of these out so I can get book 1 released. So yeah, there's a big pile. I'm sitting on so many words. I'm sitting on so many ideas. It's just finding the hours in the day.
Absolutely. This is where slowing time for you could be beneficial. You could just knock out a whole bunch of books.
That would be nice. But I do things like I'm going to be heading over to Sydney, so interstate, about 1,500 kilometers. So maybe that might be like 1,000 or so miles of driving for a book fair, and then I'm going to come back. So all these things just steal time away.
Absolutely. All right. And so where can listeners and viewers find you if they wanted to check you out on the internet?
Yeah, so I probably do my most ramblings on Facebook under R Max Tillsley. So Tillsley's TILLSLEY, R Max Tillsley. And I keep that handle for Instagram and Twitter or X. And I have it on a bunch of other socials. You can find me at either blacksskybooks.com or just type in tillsley.com. That'll take you to the same place. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, you can get autographed copies. Otherwise, of course, you can find me on Amazon. My game books, my Tangled Fates books, are also on things like Kobo as well. Whereas my other books are available through Kindle Unlimited on Amazon, which stops me from putting them out on different platforms.
And this episode is going to air first week-ish in November. So, dear listener, if you are wanting potentially signed books for the Christmas season, now would be the time to do it because shipping from Australia is a thing. If you just want to order them print on demand from Amazon, never too early to start checking those out, because these are the kind of things you give the young readers in your life. Give them a taste of your own childhood with the choose a path kind of style storytelling. And then this is the other part where I know you're getting these books for young readers, but reviews still matter. So if your kids really love the book, why don't you hop on over to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever you're getting these books, and leave a review for your kid. It does help. You're talking to other parents. Hey, my kid really liked this book and he's into cars and that's why he liked it. Well, then any other parent that's got a kid into cars, hey, maybe it's for them. So,
Yeah, it's super hard for kids' books to get reviews because they don't have the Amazon accounts. They don't have the Goodreads accounts. So, yeah, if you review my kids' books, no, I absolutely love it. Every single one means so much because, yes, the readers are kids, but the purchasers are adults. So, yeah, please do.
All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, for professional purposes only, people. All of it is linked in the Linktree. We make it really, really easy for you. Send all the shenanigans over to Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. She gets a little lonely sometimes, so the shenanigans make her happy. Speaking of, we do have our website over there on Linktree. It's hosted by Spotify, bunch of gobbledygook. Don't hate the messenger. But if you go to the Linktree, we make it really easy to hyperlink from there. When you get on that, though, on our website over on Spotify, you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce, and every penny counts. So we appreciate your patronage. You can support the show more directly over there at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink until they swim away on a river of Java, and it will only be the best coffee brand coffee for them. Speaking of, you go to the link in the show notes, use the code podcastgrunts, get 10% off. We get a kickback. It's a win-win. And it's not a drop shipping operation. It is an American roaster that hires American citizens to work there. So, shopping local, don't buy someone that's roasting it overseas and shipping it from there. Shop local. It really is good for you, good for the environment, good for your local economy. Unfortunately, they do only mail to the United States. Not the contiguous United States, though, because they will mail to Hawaii and Alaska. But if you are overseas, I encourage you to find your own local roasters, because buying local is good for your soul, good for the environment, good for your community. Do you have a favorite coffee roaster in Australia?
So one of my favorites, I say within Australia, but there's a company called Segafredo, which is actually an Italian company, but they've got an Australian arm, and they do a really, really nice coffee. We have quite a strong coffee culture here, but it's there's a lot of Italian influence, and finding your specialty roasters is fantastic, because when you roast it, get it ground nice and fresh, just the flavor, just breathe it in right up your nose. But I'm wanting that shipped over from the US now, so they sound fantastic. Just like, put your arm back, right? You're good at that American football, right? You do those throws.
You did play rugby in college. I'll have to get some in next time I do a care package. I'll send some out to Australia. Hopefully the kangaroos won't run off with it. All right.
Caffeinated kangaroos. Now there's a horror movie for you.
Oh, that's how the zombie apocalypse started. Now you're cooking with Crisco. All right. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thanks for coming on, Robert. We really appreciate this. We're sorry we had to do some shenanigans to get this recorded, because scheduling can be a pain in the butt when you're halfway across the world and 15 hours ahead of us. So we appreciate your being patient. And with that, I am going to end the show tonight, people. Thank you for coming by. Wait for it.